Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network series, Heritage Talks Online. My name is Heather Darch, and I'm here with my colleague, Glenn Pedersen, and we are project directors for the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. Thank you for being here, and welcome to our series called Dreaming Big, Inspiring Stories from Across Quebec's Heritage Community. In this series, we are exploring inspiring stories from Quebec's historical societies, museums, community organizations, and cultural groups whose vision has had a lasting impact on the history and heritage of Quebec. Quan is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to preserve and promote the history and heritage of Quebec, and in particular of Quebec's English-speaking communities spread right across the province. You're welcome to become a member of Quan, and membership is open to everyone right across the country, including heritage groups and community organizations. And to find out more about us, you can go to our website at qahn.org. Membership does give you access to all kinds of programs and workshops, to updates on the research that's going on in the community, to new publications that are coming out, and to our quarterly publication called Quebec Heritage News. This is a really great magazine filled with interesting articles and images. For example, there's a whole article about the Black Porters of Montreal by Dorothy Williams. And then we go over to square dancing in the Chateauguay Valley. There's book reviews and always a very educational and interesting editorial by our editor, Rod McLeod. So if you'd like to read more about Quebec's history that you probably have never heard of before, I encourage you to become a member and join our great network that connects you to all the organizations across the province. Today, we do have a special membership deal of a 30% discount for a one-year membership. That's just $20 for a year. And so if you're interested, you can send us a message on Facebook, if you're on Facebook Live today, that you would like to be a member. And if you're on the Zoom, you can leave a message in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. Just tell us that you are interested, but you have to do it within the length of time of our presentation today. It's just good for this period of time, for 1 hour. I would like to thank our funders who make our series possible, including Canadian Heritage, the Chalkers Foundation, the Zeller Family Foundation, and the Townshippers Foundation. Thank you very much. All of our presentations are recorded. So if you've missed any from this series or even from last year, you can go to our Facebook page, Heritage Talks Facebook page. You don't need a Facebook page of your own because it's a public site. And you can re-listen to all our recordings. You can even see the up and coming presentations that will still come up into May of this year. I'm going to pass it over to Glenn. He's going to give you a little bit of information about what you're going to be doing when our presentation is going on. Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Heather. Welcome, everyone. I'm here helping with tech. So the chat box is your best friend if you're having any issues with audio or video. You can find that in the bottom of the Zoom window. You can send the message to me privately or just send it to everyone if you don't mind sharing what you're struggling with. If you're watching on a mobile device like a phone or tablet in Zoom, you may need to tap the screen once in order to see the chat box. It might be under a menu called More or something like that. If you're on Facebook too, just leave a question in the comment. If I can help out, I will. I just want to say we are recording and live streaming this event. So if you're uncomfortable with that, you can leave and you're on Zoom, you can leave the Zoom call and just go to our Facebook page and watch there. Otherwise, you're most welcome to stay on and be part of this broadcast. So that's everything I have. Back to you, Heather.
Okay, thanks then. Well, our guest speaker today is Edward Pedersen. Edward is a retired musician and teacher born in Alberta, living in Montreal since 1976, who maintains a country residence in Barrie, Quebec. He is presently the secretary of the Barrie Historical and Heritage Society. His talk today is called Good Luck with That, Canterbury Centre, the Jewel in the Crown, or the Albatross Round Our Necks. Hi, Ed, and welcome to Heritage Talks Online.
Oh, hi, Heather. Hello from Montreal. And God bless Ukraine. I'm Edward Pedersen, and this is a heritage talk from the Bury Historical and Heritage Society of Bury. And I'll start by putting myself in context. Part one, he's not from here.
Ed, do you want to put up your PowerPoint?
Okay. Now I've disappeared.
It's okay. We'll figure this out. So are you in Zoom?
I'm not on Zoom at the moment.
Okay, so hop back to Zoom.
Now I see myself.
There you go. That's what we want. So go click the green share screen button at the bottom. And then find your PowerPoint in among those tiles. And just like we did before, click the blue share button.
Share screen.
All
There
right,
we
then
are.
one last step. Click that button that says from beginning up at the top left.
Okay. There we are.
You're off to the races.
Okay. So I've given my introduction and I can just begin, correct?
As you wish. Just pick up from where you left off there. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. My grandfather was a country doctor who delivered 600 babies in Standard, Alberta during the period from about 1920 till after World War II. After I came along, he would entertain me in his clinic office with stories about his time as a doctor in the Royal Canadian Army during World War I, which I found fascinating. And he was a great storyteller. He also loved etymology, which rubbed off on me, although I confess that as a child, I found etymology difficult to follow, let alone spell. As I grew up, his practice had evaporated, mainly because a hospital opened up in the next county, and it was modern for the 1950s. His drugstore, soda fountain, gift shop, and surgery became frozen in time, and people only came there if it was a dire emergency or they wanted to visit. But I wandered freely about that Depression-era drugstore on the Broadway in that village formerly known as New Dania or Donneview. And it seemed like I was transported back to a time when my parents were children and our town was a bustling, exciting prairie outpost. In the dugout basement of his drugstore was the coal furnace, since we lived beyond the sticks, hence no firewood. But lots of other artifacts were there, including American newspapers chronicling the Philadelphia sesquicentennial of 1926, the year of my mother's birth, and the Chicago World's Fair of 1933. To me, it seemed like a lifetime away, even though I was born a mere 2 decades later in 1951. 100 years later, my brother Joseph lives there still in our grandparents' home on Frederick Street East, and he is the mayor of that vastly changed village. Flash forward to the mid-70s. I just have to get rid of something here. There. Flash forward to the mid-70s, and I arrived in Montreal from touring 2 seasons with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet Orchestra and had no means of support. That led to my 34-year career as a music teacher, and eventually our arrival in Bury in 1990 with cats and parents in tow. Things were quiet until 2002, when several women decided that the former town hall come municipal garage should not be torn down, but rather return to its former glory as City Hall. This resulted in the formation of the Bury Historical and Heritage Society, the organizational vehicle which would lead the fight for restoration. The town council discussed the issue, but it quickly became obvious that there would be opposition. Who needs a library? The taxes will go up, which eventually provoked a referendum. Several of those women then began visiting every residence in the community of some 1,200 souls to explain the project and to secure memberships in the newly chartered Bury Historical and Heritage Society. Nicole Fortier explained to me that the executive committee and the membership worked very hard to secure sufficient support for the project. These brave and inspirational women introduced themselves and spoke passionately of culture, history, and heritage in Bury. We were appalled to hear some of the arguments against, especially those vehemently opposed to having a library in town. So, after joining the society, I took the day off from school in Montreal and traveled to Bury to cast my vote on the referendum day, only to be told by an election official checking names off the list that this is only for people from Bury. I told her to check the voters list, and she scowled at me. But after the referendum and the attendant acrimony, property destruction, and death threats, the decision was made to restore the town hall. So my story begins, and it is one of inspiration, that of the Société d'Histoire et du Patrimoine de Bury, whose name I give in French because ours is a proud bilingual community. And in fact, that is our official name. Another decade passed, and lo and behold, then president of the society, Roch Lapointe, said, "Edward, the society needs a new president, and we want you." I responded that I was too busy and would never accept being president of an executive that I had never been part of, especially with no experience. I said I'd think about it. 3 months later, my partner said that I might want to consider giving something back. And I told Roch that I would run for the executive, but under no circumstance would I accept the role of president. 6 weeks later, on March 24th, 2015, I was elected president of the society. And so much for that. A scant month or so later, I was speaking to the erstwhile warden and one of the last remaining parishioners of Christ Church, Canterbury, a little Anglican chapel on Canterbury at Victoria Road, an iconic landmark in the Eau Saint Francois. In her soft-spoken and unassuming way, Sylvia Allis announced that the church was closing. And I guess it's up to you now. In retrospect, I think she was visionary. How did she know that I was even a member of the society, let alone its newly elected president? A good answer might be, there are no secrets in Bury. At the next meeting of the executive committee, I dutifully announced that I had been approached by a warden of the chapel who said that it was to be sold, torn down, or converted to a hunting camp. And expecting an apathetic response, I was very much surprised when they decided to have a look at the building to assess its condition. The day of our visit arrived in early July 2015, and a different and indifferent warden finally showed up to let us in, and I saw the interior for the first time. Wow, I thought, how could such a beautiful place of spirituality and contemplation have been built in the middle of nowhere and survived for well over 100 years? At our rendezvous, Roch Lapointe, who was passing by with his teenage daughter, Rochelle Lapointe, who, when I said that it was too bad that the township's trail, that's Le Chemin des Cantons, didn't pass near this church, responded that we should just make our own Route des Églises. Well, that opened a whole other can of worms. I mean, discussion, which then resulted in a wonderfully successful 4-year celebration of local churches and their history. An inspirational young woman, to be sure. The executive came back to our house, which was just across the road, and decided to think about it. And then decided several weeks later to contact the Lord Bishop of the Diocese of Quebec to investigate the possible acquisition of the building. There were many preconditions from the executive committee. The locals have to get involved. They have to pay the upkeep, etc., etc. We formed a committee. Part 2, the Lord Bishop. Was that my third mistake? The first being joining the society, and the second being my telling the executive of my earlier conversation with the warden. Needless to say, there was a multitude of mistakes on my part to follow. Meanwhile, we were invited to the deconsecration of said Christ Church, Canterbury, in September 2015, and were inspired to see a church filled with people from the historical congregation, hailing from all over North America, as well as the Archdeacon, past and present priests, the Lord Bishop's representative, and several members of the society. It was announced, I thought somewhat prematurely, that the building was for sale. And one of the interested party was the Bury Historical and Heritage Society. Is that called putting the cart before the horse? Were they putting on the squeeze? At the deconsecration, we met people from Canterbury, Bury, Lennoxville, Maine, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., Toronto, California, Ottawa, and elsewhere. And we marveled at the incredible connection that so many people had with this little church and its long history. Having been warned that you better get the locals involved or it's a no-go, I took a page out of the founder's book and decided to visit the locals and see if they would come to a meeting to discuss the possible acquisition of Christ Church, Canterbury by the BHHS. I think that I had already been impressed by the whole idea of a local historical society. These women who seemed so determined, the sentinel quality of that little chapel on the edge of the forests of Canterbury, and my own roots beyond the sticks on the Canadian prairies. When the appointed day came in November of 2015, 35 people showed up to a special assembly where we discussed what would happen to the little chapel in the middle of Canterbury. There were tears, and there were questions whether or not the community of Canterbury even still existed. Some suggested that the building was in poor condition, and others said that it could become a community center. The executive committee listened, and at a later closed meeting, decided that a negotiation committee made up of Joanne Chapman, Wendy Olson, and me would negotiate with the Lord Bishop and possibly bring back to the executive a proposal to purchase, which then brought us to the Penny Bryn restaurant in Bury for breakfast with the authorized representative of the Lord Bishop of the Anglican Diocese of Quebec, the city, a venerable institution dating back to the 18th century. He explained that the diocese had closed a number of churches over the years and had disposed of them in several ways, including outright sale to the highest bidder with no conditions, or a conditional sale, such as with Good Shepherd in Bishopton, which was sold to the town for $1, or another in Montreal, which was given over to an organization over 100 years ago, with written conditions concerning its use, which, having been recently violated, had resulted in seizure by the Lord Bishop for violation of a legal contract duly signed in the 19th century. Another example was Lawrence Colony's St. George's Anglican, which was sold to the community for an undisclosed amount in the early 2000s. Regarding the Lawrence Community Center, Executive Committee member Joel Barter suggested that the community center wanted to rid itself of an important pulpit built by a member of the Pope family from Bury. That was in 2016, and 2 years later, after much back and forth between the Society, the Lawrence Community Center, and the United Cultural Center, an agreement was negotiated by you-know-who to relocate said pulpit from the Lawrence Colony to Bury's beautiful United Cultural Center on permanent loan from, yes, it's true, the Anglican Diocese of Quebec. And boy, I sure hope we don't lose that pulpit. Well, and it wouldn't fit through the Lawrence Community Center door. Recent renovations had resulted in a narrower doorway. It was time to call up some friends. Stephen Allis, Peter Lupi, Larry Smith and his son Josh, and I dismantled the solid oak pedestal, removed the stairway, got it into Larry's truck, deposited some 50 pieces on the floor of the United Cultural Center, then reassembled what turned out to be a 1920s masterpiece of oak carpentry by two men from Scottstown who were named Pope and Cowan. And Bob's your uncle. Finally, some inspirational guys who could put Humpty Dumpty back together, and in just a matter of days. Meanwhile, the negotiating committee did its job, albeit with some members of the committee making more demands than the Lord Bishop of Quebec. Of course, it was my job to transmit these demands to the Lord Bishop's representative, James Sweeney. And at one point, the gentleman said to me privately, "Gee, you folks sure want a lot for a buck, don't you?" But the deal was done, which got us the church and imposed upon the society the responsibility to maintain the building's exterior facade in perpetuity, or face the historic Montmorency vengeance. The Lord Bishop retained the right to verify the agreed to obligations every 7 years through the convocation of a committee composed of the Lord Bishop, the Society, and a mutually agreed upon architect, which some might view as an invitation for a plague of locusts. I think the deal was great and will keep us on our toes for perpetuity, so to speak. The executive committee signed off on the deal, and Christ Church Canterbury became part of the Bury Historical and Heritage Society on December 15th, 2015, for the better or for the worse. Part 3, small town pitfalls. Worse, definitely for the worse. That depends, of course, upon whether you were with them or agin them. The folks in Canterbury were pleased and formed the Canterbury Committee in February 2016 to tackle the multitude of tasks soon to arrive on their plate. The committee began meeting at our house in Canterbury because, well, it was winter and the church had an untrustworthy 65-year-old oil heater with no tank, no electricity, no water, no plumbing, not to mention no foundation, and a number of bodies buried under the front entrance. Actually, they were raccoons. Meanwhile, I was scheduling the executive committee meetings, typing up and distributing agendas, trying to figure out how the books were kept, and organizing annual general meetings, because even little historical societies have charters, members, and rules to follow. Little did I know how things were supposed to be, and after all, I had no experience, did I? Ex-President Roch Lapointe sat down with me before I started for a full morning to explain the job, provided me with lists of resources available, and organized my first activity as president, the inauguration of a brand new gazebo built to replace the spectacular 19th century structure, which was bulldozed by an overly enthusiastic town employee. Soon, I felt that I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. I was doing too much, and the others were too busy to help me out that much. My friends told me that I was doing too much. Ask them to do it, they said. Well, in fact, a lot of energy went into running the annual Strawberry Shortcake on Canada Day, or organizing Halloween festivals in the Memorial Park. But if you wanted a Route des Églises or any other heritage initiative, then you'd best do it yourself or recruit people from outside the executive committee. After a year of experience, I was now quite aware that there was no wellspring of volunteers for the executive committee. And running the Historical Society often felt like working in a hospital emergency department. Not to disparage or underestimate what our magnificent healthcare professionals have been doing for the past 2 years. At least I was retired and I did have more time than some to give over. You are probably now starting to wonder, are all small town organizations the same? Do they all have recruiting problems? Are people doing jobs that they are unqualified for? Taking up positions for the wrong reasons? Leaving too few to do the heavy lifting? It's a good question, isn't it? In 2018, I attended the first Quan Fall Fair at the Eaton Corner Museum, and then the 2019 Quan Convention in Knowlton, Quebec. And I collected a number of Quan publications on how to recruit members, run executive committees and fundraising, amongst other things. These are excellent bilingual guides that anyone involved with historical societies or any small town community groups should read carefully. Unfortunately, our ship had sailed. Nevertheless, it was a great experience to rub shoulders with hundreds of people who shared a passion for history and heritage. In reality, we all need more of the skills described in the handbooks, but I continued to negotiate the pitfalls of shepherding our disparate little flock, and I understood that there was a number of measures that could be taken for a healthy executive committee. Question: if large corporations are difficult to manage and require highly paid professionals, then small community groups should be easy to run, shouldn't they? Well, if you believe that, then I have a bridge to sell you. Montreal's first Champlain Bridge, built in 1962. And there's the catch. Small communities like Bury, and its even smaller suburbs like Canterbury and Brookbury, are distinct entities with histories, traditions, issues, families established for many generations, egos, politics, property lines, not to mention lines in the sand, and personalities. One needs to tread very lightly and get a lot of advice, even though much of it might be bogus. A small town historical society has to cater to the entire population and avoid as many potholes as possible along the way, which is why you need an executive that understands the community. Oh dear, I forgot to mention gossip. Now, there's a lot of that, and you best stay as far away as you can. Part 4, let the fun begin. Much to the surprise of many people, both within and outside of the society, the Canterbury Committee thrived, coming up with all kinds of fundraising, cultural, and social activities that began raising the profile of the project, as well as a lot of money. We organized a flea market that drew lots of curious people willing to spend some money, and a lot of the stock came from our attic and barn, since we were auction junkies and had a lot of surplus stock, to put it mildly. A carpenter with a fondness for heritage buildings and another willing helper volunteered to help with repairs and restorations to the building, which was falling apart. And repairs to the heritage jewel began in spring 2016, a scant 4 months after the society acquired the building. The carpenter, Stephen Ollis, prepared a priority list that began with us crawling under the building to jack it up, since the structure was in danger of collapse. Worked like a charm, since I'm still here to talk about it and not buried under a pile of rubble. We used industrial jacks, courtesy of a local contractor, Michel Saint-Laurent, and wrestled many heavy filled stones into place. We didn't crack any windows, because most of them were already cracked from 115 years of rock and roll. Dennis Chapman, who was baptized and married in the church, told me, "Oh, we used to jack it up every spring." Maybe there actually are bodies buried under there. And how do you turn a small chapel with 22 pews into a multifunctional space, able to host art exhibits, flea markets, dance troupes, and community suppers? An open-minded attitude, pun intended, prevailed. And with our resident carpenter in charge, the plan was to remove all but the last row of pews, then range as many as possible around the perimeter. But a lot of effort was required because the pews were only one-ended, the other end being attached to the wall. A week later, it was done, including a couple of newel posts to tie things together. And neighbor and assistant carpenter Peter Lupi offered to help paint the floor. The excess pews went into our barn, where some were converted into freestanding benches when we had lots of people. We then got some chairs donated to fill the center of the hall when concerts were planned, and folding tables also donated for community suppers or flea markets. Actually, I donated the chairs, and my partner, Tony DeMello, donated the tables. We celebrated by having a community potluck supper in August 2016, which was swamped by people and a lot of good food. Don't forget that the buttresses are falling off. Indeed, most of them had some rot on the bottom, and all of the tops were in various states of decay, which is a problem when you're dealing with a Carpenter Gothic building trying to imitate Notre Dame de Paris. So out came the chainsaw. Yes, the chainsaw. And the top planks of the buttresses were cut off where they began to rot. The lower parts were cleaned up and rotted parts replaced. And rotted and missing cedar siding was also replaced. Muriel Watson, one of Bury's more notable volunteers, suggested that we should cover the tops of the buttresses with a more durable material. And the idea came to fruition when they were capped with white aluminum in 2020, and the entire building was scraped and painted. The old Gothic arched doors were made of maple, but had decrepit plywood veneer to hide rot. After the maple floorboards were removed in 2017 from a century-old home on Canterbury Road, Stephen took the boards and fashioned them into brand new 100-year-old maple Gothic doors. And after a little touch-up welding by Gilles Goland's brother Claude, the original cast iron hinges were refitted to the doors and frame. In 2017, we decided to launch a capital campaign, appealing far and wide to ask for support for a restoration program that would place a concrete slab under the building, moving it 40 feet north and 15 feet east. The second objective of the campaign was to restore the 1922 stained glass windows, commissioned by James Sharman in honor of his father, Ebenezer, and his wife, that had been ravaged by the weather for nearly 100 years. The required estimates were obtained, but stained glass restorer Hugo Baillargeon from Verdun drove out in a February 2019 snowstorm to examine the windows, marveling at their quality and how they had survived with no protection for so long. He was our man. Irwin and Muriel Watson held a fundraising luncheon in late 2017 for Sharman clan members from Ontario, Alberta, points in the USA, and members of the Canterbury Committee. Some money was raised and momentum was gathering. In 10 years, we might even raise the $35,000 objective for the foundation and the stained glass windows. We now had $8,500 in the kitty, but a long ways to go. Another Marché aux Puces and a Celtic concert raised a few thousand, and our donation box swelled with every event. And then it happened. We were approached by a couple who wished to make a donation to the capital campaign on the condition of anonymity. Our foundation was paid for by that donation. We had estimates in hand, but after an estimate of $1,200 just to survey the property, we said to heck with that, and we got out our tape measures and then subtracted 12 feet in every direction just to be sure. Then we received a call from a notary informing us that a client of his, whose identity could not be disclosed, was interested in making what he called a significant bequest. We supplied the notary with all of our hopes, dreams, and financial information. And to this day, that information is confidential and sealed. I cannot tell you, even though I am aware of the nature of that bequest. But someday, all will be revealed. The list of priorities had placed the stained glass windows at the bottom of the list. Replacing the cross, painting the building, installing electricity. Almost everything was a higher priority than the stained glass windows. And that became a problem for me, since the capital campaign letter clearly indicated two projects, the foundation and the stained glass windows. What was I to do, since I didn't want to question the committee's wisdom? We had mounted the campaign, and the goal had been met by that time. So what was I to do? I had signed that letter, along with Christian Veilleux, chairman of the Canterbury Committee. Of course, the answer came to me in the middle of the night. Just pay for the darn thing. So I summoned up all of my inspiration and donated $3,000 for the window. Stephen and Hugo swung into action just a couple of months after the foundation was poured. And I got quite a few good nights' sleep out of that. Other projects followed swiftly. The electrical system was replaced and connected to the grid. Stephen spent 400 hours fabricating beautiful pine shutters that were fit into the bell chamber that had been boarded up since 1985. The brick chimney was dismantled and removed by Gilles Gaulin, Bob Boston, Tony DeMello, Stephen Allis, and me. Underneath the chimney, we found a 6 by 6 inch beam signed in large cursive script, Ebenezer Sharman. He was the man that had given the land for the building in 1896. And obviously he'd had a hand in building it. The steeple roof and cross were replaced. The belfry was repaired and painted. And in 2020, the entire building was scraped and painted. Landscaping is an ongoing project. Speaking of the belfry, I can't resist telling you a story from Irwin Watson, who was told by Morris Gooden, the former owner of our property, that he had foiled a theft of the Canterbury Bell, having interrupted the thieves after they had gotten the bell onto the ground. Now, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but there is a picture of the Canterbury Bell in the corner there. We gained access to the belfry in 2019, once again with the use of a chainsaw. And we're surprised to find that the bell was 3 feet wide, 4 to 5 feet tall, and extremely heavy. That bell could not be removed from the belfry simply because it is larger than any of the openings. So the belfry must have been built around it. So the legend of the bell is false. Maybe Irwin and Morris were enjoying a nip when they came up with that one. Optimistic, inspired, or naive delusionism can be a positive force when undertaking seemingly impossible tasks, like raising children, or in my case, as you may have seen earlier, herding cats. I never had time to think too far ahead, what with my duties as president, the various other projects that we had on the go, like La Route des Églises, the Strawberry Shortcake, our numerous historical conferences, all the meetings of the executive committee and the Canterbury Committee, the Canterbury Capital Campaign, my unwanted secretarial duties, and a host of other problems. But at the same time, we began to see a trickle of success, whether it was a profitable flea market, a sold-out concert, a crowded community supper, people just hanging out at farmers markets, or people stopping by to say, keep up the good work. It was a very good thing, since I was reaching the point of exhaustion. Part 5, how much inspiration do you need? It's time to acknowledge some more of the collaborators who shared in the project, our partners in crime, And here's the thing. So many people were becoming involved in the project that the tide began to turn. Sylvia Allis was the woman who quietly signaled the need to do something to save Christ Church, Canterbury. In retrospect, I realized that some of the most inspiring people are the most modest. All those folks who came from all over North America to witness the wrenching closure of Christ Church, Canterbury, on behalf of the founding families, made quite an impression on us. And many of them donated to our fundraising campaign, even though their families may have left Canterbury a half century or more ago. Irwin and Muriel Nee Hammond Watson attended that first meeting in November 2015, when the winds of change blew in from Canterbury. And they started attending events at the church, visiting with us, introducing us to their cousin Lucas Sharman from Alberta, and getting to know what kind of men you are, to quote Irwin. Muriel died last November, but I fondly remember her. Whether it was as a perennial volunteer for the annual Strawberry Shortcake on Canada Day, attending the annual General Assemblies, having lunch with Lucas and us in Canterbury, or driving the Lincoln over to Canterbury to see how the foundation was proceeding. Irwin continues to inspire me. At 99 years and 9 months, still expressing concern for his beloved little chapel in Canterbury, still interested in how the committee is running things. Dennis and Irma Chapman also attended that November 2015 meeting, which isn't surprising considering that they were married in Christchurch. Irma has always been the first to raise her hand in volunteering in Bury, and the last to criticize anyone or anything. Dennis keeps everyone entertained with his sometimes unbelievable but wonderful stories, and keeps showing up to support the effort whenever he can, often with Irma in tow. What inspirations they both are. Madeline Irving was the organist at that last service in Canterbury, and was famous throughout the region for her sense of community, volunteerism, not to mention her musical service to so many churches in the Saint Francois. She also hosted the Scottstown Celtic Festival on the banks of the Salmon River near her home in Scottstown. I believe they call them Kayleys. Madeline supported the restoration of the Canterbury Centre, but didn't live to see it completed. And when we attended her funeral at St. Paul's Presbyterian in Scottstown, many of the hundreds of people present had to stand outside because there wasn't even standing room inside. What an inspiring woman. Debbie Otte's father bought the former Canterbury School in the 1950s, and she spent the summers of her youth in Canterbury. When she and her sisters inherited the school, she became the one who treasured it and used the retreat the most. A perennial member of the Historical Society, she and her then boyfriend, now husband, Dave McLean, were concerned about the fate of the little chapel bordering their property, and began donating to the restoration generously and repeatedly. We still enjoy Debbie and Dave's company. Dave says that the way he was raised in a huge brood of children gave him no choice but to participate in helping good causes. Thanks, Deb and Dave. John Mackley joined the executive committee in 2018 and quickly became an energy powerhouse. Finally, our own Energizer Bunny. With many diverse interests, John inspires many people with his sympathetic attitude and multifaceted life experience. The Quan experience has been extraordinary. Matthew Farfan, Heather Darch, Rod McLeod, Grant Myers, members of the board, and the entire team have made a huge impact on us with their amazing support for our small historical society. Thanks to Kwan from the bottom of our hearts. Akesh Gill Coleman joined the Canterbury Committee in 2017 and came up with our first grant application, a project called Metropolis that proposed creating a summer youth-driven educational center. Akesh managed to amass 1,700 votes of support over the month-long campaign. We never got the grant, but what an impressive effort. Thanks, Akesh. Lori and Mary Sakamoto are longtime members of the Society and supporters of the former St. Paul's Rest Home and the Image community newspaper, amongst other things. We came to know them personally when they asked for some help moving equipment from their home to the armory for the annual Image Valentine's Brunch. It quickly became apparent that they were hardcore volunteers, and we learned a great deal from them, including how to prepare and cook 1,000 pancakes in 2 hours. Thanks to both of you. Le Chiesa Rural del Quebec, por una strategia di tutela e valorizzazione. Please excuse my Italian. Praxed Levesque Lapointe is a rather well-known and award-winning local farm woman and a then member of the Society who attended the meeting where we looked at Christ Church, albeit with skepticism. She didn't take very long before she pointed out that she had a daughter in Milan who had just written a book on the repurposing of Quebec churches. I responded, "Milan, that's just up the road, isn't it?" She replied, "Mais non, Milan en Italie." Sarah had written the book for her thesis in architecture at the Politecnico di Milan, and she became aware of our project through her mother, Praxed, sending us a letter of encouragement along with a translation to English of some of the salient points in the book. You'd be amazed to compare our action plan with some of the thesis suggestions. We should find the money to translate her thesis into French and English because of its relevance to the reality of Quebec churches today. Praxed left the Society shortly after, but she replaced herself with her sister, Dominique. Several years later, I bumped into her at the local Valentine's brunch and I burst out with, "Praxed, tu me manques." Well, didn't she come back the following year? And now she's president, thank God. And her sister Dominique has also returned, which says a lot more about her strength of character than the merits of the executive committee. Lucas Sharman is a descendant of the original Sharmans, lives in Alberta with his wife Toyin, a pack of children, and pursues many interests such as history, art, and his own roots. He has visited us many times, enlightening us, encouraging and inspiring us, and donating generously many times to the Canterbury Project. Lucas, when are you coming back? Soon, I hope. Gilles Denis is a very inspiring man from Cookshire who has supported the Society's many projects and also the Canterbury Project for years. He recently celebrated his 75th birthday and told the Journal du Haut-Saint-François that he looks forward to many community projects in the future. He is one of those people who, when you bump into him, you feel like the sun has just come out from behind the clouds. Linda Shattuck and Kathy McClintock are two very inspiring women from our community who I cannot really give credit to because we'd be here all day noting their multitude of contributions and accomplishments and their best friends with each other. Small wonder. My partner, Tony DeMello, is an artist, teacher, and my friend for the last 36 years. I don't think he anticipated the Canterbury Project as it is officially known in the Historical Society. But as time went on, he showed his true colors. He began attending meetings of the Canterbury Committee, like he had a choice, and volunteering for various tasks, donating his time, hard physical labor, and behind the scenes, donating a great deal of money. When I had a bad meeting, and there were a few, he would try to cheer me up with a cup of tea or often something much stronger. And in the long run, he inspired me to keep going, to not give up, to keep my eye on the prize. Candace Coleman is a much loved member of the Canterbury Committee. Spouse, mother, grandmother, weaver, a friend to all, member of the venerable Coleman clan, and a member of the Canterbury Committee. Candy is a steady hand at the till of the boat, cautious, yet optimistic, always ready to lend a hand when one is needed. And when all else fails, she'll produce some famous Canterbury donuts to get us through. She organized the Canterbury Farmers Markets in 2021, despite the COVID problems, and without Peter Lupe's help, since he was marooned in New Zealand. And she ran a record profit to top it off. Yet another inspiring woman. Gilles Golin loves to work in the woods to make maple syrup, which he gives all away, to run his farm like a top, to rebuild antique vehicles. He loves the Canterbury Centre, and he works at restoring the place like your average 40-year-old. Until you check his birth date. I wish to heck that I could keep up with him. Gilles is also a member of the Canterbury Committee and an inspiration. Stephen Allis isn't perfect when it comes to carpentry and associated aesthetics, but it's not often that you can catch him up. He took on so many challenges when it came to the project and saw them all through to the end. I'm very slow, he would often say, but the price was right. And really, in fact, no one could do it as well or as quickly. For his many crimes, he received the Marion Phelps Award for volunteerism over an extended period of time for heritage projects by Quan in 2021. Not only did he receive the award, but the entire Quan Board of Directors drove into Canterbury from all over Quebec, and we had a big celebration. My heart was bursting with pride when we read out all the names on the 125th anniversary plaque of those who contributed to our 3-year fundraising campaign for Canterbury Centre. And our beloved carpenter received his award to the tunes of bagpipers and lots of wonderful food under sunny Canterbury skies. Stephen is a huge inspiration in my life, and I can say in the lives of many a soul who know him. Although he had a catastrophic work accident in 1986, he continues to build, to restore, to work in the woods, and has a new hip this year to make things easier. He is the son of Sylvia Allis. No surprise there. I realize now, 7 years later, that projects like our old town hall, the new gazebo, or the Canterbury project cannot happen unless there are a lot of people pulling together, doing what needs to be done. And an historical or heritage group on your side is a great way to focus the energy and the inspiration required. Now, wouldn't you love to hear the other side? You know, the Albatross side? Fortunately, we are really out of time. But I would love to know how opponents to the Canterbury Project feel now the little chapel stands so proud on the edge of the Salmon River Valley, an iconic symbol of history, family, determination, spiritual inspiration, and perseverance. Actually, I don't think there is another side anymore, since one of the most vocal opponents attended the recent celebration and announce, you did it. It wasn't even my idea, for goodness sake. But our optimistic delusionism had paid off in the end. It was a grand day in the heart of the townships. And I think you know the verdict. Canterbury is the much prized jewel in the crown of the Bury Historical and Heritage Society. Then the infamous Canterbury wind blew the tent over and smashed it to bits. No one was hurt, just my pride, since I had bought the darn thing. If you've noticed, I've provided you with some info. You can visit the website or write to us, maybe give us a donation or join up. Thank you all very much. I've wanted to get this off my chest for a long time, and I thank Heather Darch for the opportunity. Thanks again to Quan for all that you do, not just for the Anglophone community, but for all Quebecers. Thanks to Glenn Pedersen for his kind technical help and expertise. Thanks also to Tony DeMello, who supplied most of the photos for the talk, and who reminds you that all images are copyrighted, but may be used if credit is given. Several photos are by our John Mackley. One last thing. In 2016, I ran into a neighbor who said he heard that we'd decided to acquire the church. And he said we'd never pull that place together and we'd be better off to just let it go. I replied that we'd already decided and had to give it a go. He said, good luck with that. Good thing I didn't listen to him, eh?
Oh, Ed, that's fantastic. What a great story you've just given us. I think you're a storyteller just like your grandfather. I know Glenn will just remind everybody how to ask questions now. We can all come on and you can turn on your cameras so that we can create a bit of a community and you can ask Ed some questions, but I'll just let Glenn explain how to do that.
Indeed. If you have a question for Ed, again, the chat box, you can just, if you want to come on camera and on mic and ask your question directly, just say I have a question in the chat box. It's down at the bottom of Zoom. And if you're on a mobile device, you may have to tap your screen once to see it. You can also type your question in the chat and Heather or myself will relay it on your behalf. Same goes for people watching on Facebook. I'll try to get over there and take a look at your questions there. Otherwise, if you know where the raise hand feature is in Zoom, not everyone does, it's under the reactions button. You can use that too. That works just as well. So I'll pass it back to you, Heather.
Okay, great. I see we do have a question already from Vicky. So Vicky, take it away.
All right, let me unmute Vicky.
Okay.
I wish it was that seamless, Heather.
Yeah, I should listen to what you're telling me.
It's all good. Vicky, you're on.
Thanks.
Welcome.
I want to thank, first of all, Mr. Pedersen for this great presentation. It was amazing. And I wanted to ask him, by the end of his presentation, he mentioned about this, but I wanted him to explain furthermore. It seems there is a strong sense of belonging in Canterbury. Do you think that the campaigns for the conservation of the Anglican Church and the town hall developed this feeling, or did it exist in the decades before and emerge by this initiative by the Canterbury committee?
I love that question. And I would answer it this way. The community of Bury is a very old community. It dates back to 1836 when the British American Land Company bought the land for the Eau Saint-Francois. And Bury was formed. And almost at the same time, the outlying areas of Canterbury and Brookbury were also formed. And in those days, a big trip would have been to Bury from Canterbury, or a trip to Sherbrooke might be done every few years or something like that. So they built up their traditions, and they built up a collective memory in the community. I have only been there since I'm a newcomer, only been there since 1990. And they say, oh, you live on the Gooden place still today. So there is a collective memory. Even though I've been there for over 30 years now, I live on the Gooden place. So there is a memory there, and everybody seems to know it. But I have to tell you also, the other part of your question, was community, a sense of community brought out by these activities? Most definitely, yes. I would say that the Bury Historical and Heritage Society, its most important work is that of reminding the community of its heritage. And it does so in both English and French. The majority of our members, I believe now, are Francophones, and all of our executive meetings are in French. But we still have a very strong Anglophone membership, and a long time membership. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, and we're having, probably like many small historical societies, we're having trouble because we're losing some of our members through lack of contact. And so, you know, history is fine, heritage is fine, but if you don't maintain it, it's like a delicate plant, a flower. It has to be nurtured and watered and maintained.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Vicky. There's a comment, and this is funny, Ed, because we had this discussion before the presentation started. But Joyce said, just a comment. Excellent presentation. Lots of familiar scenes and faces. I grew up in Bury on Victoria Road, the road to Canterbury. I noticed that you pronounce the town as Bury, but I only knew it as Barry. So I wondered if you could explain that little strangeness.
Well, it works this way. If your family has been in Bury for, let's say, a good amount of time, like 100 years or 80 years even, then it is Barry. It's not Bury. If you're from away, like me, I come from Alberta, it's Bury. And Bury seems to creep in because the Francophone members of the community have always pronounced it as Bury, dating back to the 1860s. Because obviously, for a Francophone, Bury makes much more sense than Barry. And so that's my answer to the story. If you're from Bury for a long time, it's Barry. If you're from away, it's Bury. And if you're a Francophone, it's Bury. There you go.
I said both when I was introducing you.
Yes, you're excellent.
Yes. Now it's, oops, I've just got to find the chat again. Megan asks, now that the center is restored, is it open for all members of the community? Can you apply to use it for private events? Is it only used as a community center?
The Canterbury Centre is open to all members of the community. For members of the Historical Society, it is available free of charge. All they have to do is book it. And for members of the community who are not members of the Historical Society, you can reserve it for $50.
Fantastic. It'd be a great place for a family reunion or a little wedding, something like that, eh?
Before it was deconsecrated, it was quite often used for really classy weddings. And so if somebody wants to get married, we'll be more than happy to provide the most beautiful setting you could ever possibly imagine.
I believe it. I mean, the interior of the church, the center is gorgeous. The wood paneling is beautiful, and it's wonderful that was you didn't have to restore that. That was in good condition.
Well, we have done a lot of restoration, but it was Hugo Bayargent who pointed out that, it's really beautiful the inside, but if you ever come across a little more money, you might want to have the interior restored as well. And the actual varnish on the walls has begun to bubble a bit and to crack. So there could be some restoration done there. But that's a ways down the road when and if we get some more money.
Right. Is the church heated? Is that you can use it in the winter as well?
We have installed electric heating in the building, but the building is not insulated. And you can use the building up, I would say up to mid-November, maybe late November, or you can begin using it now because it does have heating. We have electrical heating installed.
Okay. How long was the church left empty before it, before it was taken over by the Historical Society?
It was never left empty. Well, actually, you could say it was left empty from September 2015 to December 2015, a couple of months, because the Historical Society took it over right away. And it's surprising how quickly activities were taken up again in 2016, and it hasn't stopped since. It's quite a busy little place now.
It's a wonderful story. I mean, it's a story that's very recognizable to anybody that's working in a heritage and historical society in a small rural setting. It's finding the people. It's finding volunteers willing to commit to a big project. It's finding funding. It's all that community, small p politics that you have to maneuver around. But if you can find a really strong board of directors that you did, I think that helps make projects move forward for sure. But it is maneuvering all the small town stuff that's can be quite awkward and difficult. But it sounds like you did it.
When you first asked me if I would be interested in giving this little talk, I thought about what you were looking for, the inspiration. And in fact, I hadn't thought about that during the first few years about, the inspiration. But after you asked, I started to think about it. And then I realized, you know what? I think we've been inspired. It was something that had affected us very, very deeply. And so many people were inspired. And it has a lot to do with history. History and heritage is a very inspiring thing. I wish more people would realize that. Anyway, there you go.
Well, the way you've documented it too, and giving everybody credit for the participation that they brought to the project, and it's really, that's so important for community building, that people realize, I did that, I put some time into that, and I was recognized and I was thanked. And that's all part of building a community project. It's all part of building an historical society and a volunteer program. And you did it so beautifully. You can really tell that you have such a passion, and so did all those people that you mentioned as well.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could do some of these things over again, and then we could do them a little bit better? Because, of course, there's lots of mistakes that were made, but you're right. Being a team and encouraging each other, it really, really does make a huge difference. And it has worked for us. And I'm sure many of the people who are listening may have been through a similar process.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Are they representing historical societies that are trying to figure it out? And I'd like to thank you for mentioning the articles and the books that Quan has published about volunteering and fundraising and building community projects. And those are available if you contact the Quan office for your own historical societies. And different people have worked on those over the years and through experience, and they're meant to guide groups like yourself and other historical societies through some of those steps of building projects and volunteer organizations. So thanks for mentioning that. That's all available on the Quan website. So you can just contact qahn.org for more information about that. I don't know if there are any more questions coming from Facebook, Glenn. I don't see any others at the moment now on our Zoom chat.
Just lots of words of encouragement and thanks. Ed, maybe I'll send you a copy of the chat after, and take a look on Facebook if you want. There's you really, inspiration is the word of the day, and I think you've given a lot of it to people. So thanks for that.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed. And we'll bring our session to a close. But again, thank you so much for this wonderful story. I will actually have to get out there to Barrie sometime this summer, Bury, and see the village, see the site, and go to the community center. I thought it was a wonderful story. So thank you. It was inspiring for sure. And for those of you that would like to follow us on another adventure, we're going to have another Heritage Talk coming up this Thursday, March 24th at 7 o'clock at night, right here on Heritage Talks Facebook Live, or you can pre-register to be on Zoom. And it's with Daniel Nolette of the Conseil de Abenaki de Odanak. And his talk is called The Abenaki of Odanak, Preserving History, Language, Culture, and Traditions. So that should be quite inspirational as well. So again, thank you so much, Ed. It was a wonderful presentation. Thanks to your team at the Bury Historical Heritage Society. Fantastic bunch of people you have there. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Thank you, Glenn, for keeping us on track as always. And don't forget, you can find out more about us at the Quan website or going to our Heritage Talks Facebook page. So have a great afternoon. First day of spring. It's great. Go out and enjoy it. Bye now.